and welcome to today's webinar on the 4 powerful strategies of data transformation. I'm Megan Winnery, Senior Demand Gen Manager at Telium, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. This webinar will last approximately 45 minutes and will be recorded. The slides in the recording of the presentation will be made available at the end of the session. You'll find some related resources in the attachment section that you can view during or after the webinar, so be sure to check them out. And we want to hear your questions, so please use the Ask a Question feature to submit them. And for any questions that we aren't able to answer live, we'll follow up with you after. And lastly, you'll see the social hashtag for today's webinar in the lower right-hand corner of our deck, hashtag Telium Data Transformation Webinar. We encourage you to retweet, like, and share as we live tweet throughout the webinar. And now on to our speaker. Catherine Ballantyne is the Director for Solutions Consulting in APAC for Telium. Catherine has spent 25 years in IT, marketing, and digital development, specifically working with the data that drives these tools. She provides problem-solving resources to organizations evolving their omni-channel activation capabilities. Previously, Catherine has held a number of regional roles with multinational organizations such as Oracle, IBM, Axiom, Marketo, and an independent digital consultant. All right, let's get this started. Catherine, take it away.
Thanks, Megan, and thanks to everyone joining us on the line. In my role at Telium, I've had the privilege of working with a wide range of organizations across the Asia-Pacific region. I look forward to spending the next 30 minutes exploring with you some of the key strategies some of our most successful customers are using to achieve data transformation. But first, let's get some context. At the moment, we're seeing the rise of a dual tide. As experience becomes king, so does the drive to raise a consistent, relevant CX. But this can only be achieved when there is an independent data supply chain that rises synchronously beneath it. The data supply chain is a neutral, consciously built, and independent of the tools that generate and ultimately utilize the data it transports, enriches, and distributes. We've seen some commonalities with these customers in terms of the milestones they hit to build the data supply chain. Define, protect, understand, activate, optimize, and predict. These milestones are not necessarily consecutive. There is an interplay between them, driven by the business constraints and priorities. These milestones are part of a new BAU that these businesses are embedding, and this cycle kicks off with the introduction of each new data source. It's interesting that in the market for a long time there's been a drive to start at the activate stage, and this theme still persists, probably because it's the most visible stage. But if the goal truly is that consistent, relevant CX, then in our experience, the success of the activation stage will be driven by the quality of the 3 stages prior: define, protect, and understand. So, the data supply chain exists to support customer data orchestration, one future-proofed, conscious approach to managing customer data. It's the idea of getting data where it needs to go in real time across teams, technologies, and customer touchpoints. Often when I'm talking to an organization, I get the response, this idea sounds great, but how do we get this achieved? Underpinning this maturity cycle are 4 core strategies that should be defined by a cross-business team independent of your technologies. These strategies should be technologically agnostic, but ultimately must be returned to those technologies to drive the plans and tactics for your business to execute. It is these 4 strategies that we will focus on for the rest of the session. The first, source onboarding, is all about how do I get this data in. The second, data layer definition, is how do I standardize it and where is it best for this to happen? Identity resolution. How do I optimize how I know an individual at any point in time? And then the persona mapping back to the technologies. How do I take my current business comms and service processes and map them to the technology for adoption? Let's start with the data sources. Data sources are an ever-growing list of places where your visitors are experiencing your brand. They can be websites, apps, beacons in store, CRM solutions, data warehouses, billing or booking systems, marketing databases. The list goes on and on. There's long been talk of customer at the centre, but rather than solve this problem, we've actually seen it become more complex with the ever-growing number of sources. So, it's time to take control. The order and plan for controlling the data and onboarding it is a bit like a campaign calendar for data sources, a prioritized schedule of the order and time for onboarding each of these sources. There's some key processes the key aspects you need to know about this process. First, you should expect this to be ongoing. You will see new data sources pop up within your organization on an ongoing basis, and the process of bringing these on board has to be embedded in your BAU. Also, in our experience, initial onboarding will take you approximately 3 months. You can expect to see this shorten as you get capability crossover and you become more experienced in the process. I would recommend starting with building a 2-year view of the data sources that you want to bring on. So that can be current data sources that you have and also ones that you have planned. Doing the 2-year view helps with prioritization. If you view it purely from the dev cycle of the data source, it is very tempting to actually prioritize tracking in favor of some specific function you might want to get out of the tool itself. And if the business need is strategic, that all customer data come together, there needs to be a balancing of these two requirements put up against that priority. The next piece is making digital a priority. There is much that you can learn from the process of matching your digital assets in terms of structuring data for speed, and it is also it's still the predominant gateway for many of the media tools you will need to be using. The last piece is simply making the timeline agile in its nature. Each of the data sources should be packaged up in its own specific project so that it can be moved around as business priorities change. How do you actually do this data source scheduling? The best way to start is with the business constraints that your business is facing. Once you have these, identify and prioritize all of the data sources that you have, both existing and planned over that 2-year period. Slot in these sources based on their priority in terms of getting them into the data supply chain and the business constraints you identified in step 1. Once you have all of this, start work on the resources required to meet that deadline. If there are not enough resources within the business, then that's when you start working with identifying how you can bring on additional resources. As part of the session, we'll provide a template that will help you with completing these steps. So having completed the data source onboarding, we moved to the unified data layer. The unified data layer was a concept developed for websites, but we're now seeing it spread to satisfy the same mandates for flexibility, democracy, ease of implementation and data speed across the channels for Unity. In my opinion, it's the key strategy, yet it is the one we see the most resistance to, probably because there is some front-loading of work that occurs. But from what we've seen, the gains in this front-loading in terms of significantly reducing the rework and removing the bottlenecks from later in the process make it certainly worthwhile. A data layer is a neutral definition of the data important to your organization in the language of the business. There are some key pieces that are important that make a data layer important. First, it's foundational to the data supply chain because it ensures consistent distribution of data to all recipients. The second part that is key is that it decouples the data from the experience layer that generates it, enabling it to be managed in an independent unified asset of its own environment. Democracy is also key. What do I mean by data democracy? I mean that for an organisation to scale, one of the things that must happen going forward is that everyone must have direct access to the data. For this to be achieved, every person in the business must be able to understand the data as it is actually surfaced and make it usable to all. Without the data layer, real-time isn't a possibility. Its presence removes the traditional bottleneck that we've seen at the point of unification. And then the last piece is privacy. The data layer gives us the ability to control, design, and audit the data as it is generated. These pieces are key to building a sustainable communication framework with the people that want to experience your brand. And then there's standardization. I could spend a whole nother 30 minutes talking about the value of the data layer with respect to machine learning and how I actually get something that is easily loadable into new machine learning models. But I think I'd get told off for my timing, so we'll move on. So, while data layers form to improve the consistency and smooth implementation, as they have grown to have wider application, there are a few key areas to ensuring their success. First, technologies come and go, but your data will persist. So make sure it's resilient to these changes and accessible to all by using business language, not technology, when you build it. Across the same theme, it needs to be planned and cross-business in its capability. The next piece is make it simple. Make everybody able to understand it. Remove the complexity by making it a flat structure and ensure that it is consistent across all definitions. Also, ensure that you take a look at how you have defined your analytics solution in the process. There is much that's been learnt with the analytics tools in terms of how the data can be surfaced out into them. And so they are always a good learning piece when I'm defining a data layer. And then the last piece is simply bringing it back to the technology that's surfacing this data. Walk through the function so that you ensure that the data that you are surfacing is related to the source that is generating it. So, identity resolution. It's the process by which your business connects separate data sources or streams so that you can get an optimal understanding of any visitor's state with respect to your brand right now. Previously, this process has been organic and often channel specific, but now businesses are realizing there is decisive value in developing a strategy to optimize it. The tide of change brings a new way of thinking with the person at the center, where identity is key to achieving that. It is really an ongoing process of continually mapping disparate data back to a centralized user to ensure consistent and relevant messaging in a sustainable manner. We know that a business understands an individual, how a business understands an individual is an oscillating process as devices and identifiers change, and it's unlikely that we'll ever completely know someone, but that does not undermine the value of optimizing what we can know. The identifiers that an individual has changes through the life cycle with a brand. Some identifiers belong to a brand and are specific to these individuals. These are the best option for understanding who this person is. Then there are identifiers needed when the business wants to communicate in a third-party environment. They are important to store to improve reach. If across the life cycle of a visitor's experience with your brand, we can collect the experience and develop a profile of this person based on all their identities that can be distributed anywhere real time, we can be always ready to respond consistently. But how? At Telium, we've developed a process by which we work with organisations to map their known identifiers, establish where there is strong stitching potential and where there is potential weakness, then use this to prioritise their tactics for harvesting programs. The process starts by understanding the various ways individuals along the customer express themselves along the customer journey and where these are stored. This process will establish the gaps in your identity resolution and inform the prioritisation of the tactics for addressing these goals. Again, we can provide a worksheet for you that can walk you through this process. Some of the tactics that we find works well to actually identify them are things like emailing a receipt to an individual after they've purchased rather than handing them a physical copy, gated content, free Wi-Fi registration, competitions, membership or login, and loyalty capabilities. So we move on to the fourth and final strategy, persona. How do we take what we already know and move it into technology? This is the final piece. It is a process of combining targeted personas, behaviour detection, prioritisation against business KPIs, and defining how success will be measured, then mapping it back through to the technologies you use today and plan to use tomorrow. For most organisations we work with, the breadth of the life cycle and technology is new. These are hard problems, and you may need a partner with the technology and experience and skill to augment your team. So, where do we start? The first piece is to actually map how the personas that you have relate to the life cycle of the customer. Here we can see a picture of a model that we've used for one customer where we've simply mapped the personas that they have against the life cycle of those customers. Once we have that, we can work with each individual persona, behaviour and triggers to the next phase to actually identify how this translates into the technology. Last piece, well, we need to be able to prioritise how we will implement these personas up against what the business goals are. These priorities also help us with measurement. One of the key pieces to making personas work well and being able to actually effectively adopt is ensuring that as part of the persona planning piece, that you have actually developed the measurements by which you will measure success. The examples of these are total marketable population, total active users, lifetime value. Each is specific to the organisations that we work with and is identified within the process of persona mapping. So, to recap, there are 4 cross-business strategies that should be instigated in any data transformation to ensure customer data orchestration. The key takeaways I would suggest from this presentation are that these processes are ongoing and should be embedded into business as usual. All should be done cross-business and independent of the technologies you work with. And some of them you have likely not done before and will likely take some time to embed in a cross-business team. I want to leave you with one last thought. As the pressure of CX bears down upon the ever-growing mandates for performance, stability and privacy, we are seeing the sparkling of data diamonds from the companies that are taking the lead in assertively building an independent data supply chain to consistently orchestrate all their real-time customer interactions. It is a process where everyone is learning and the potential gains are great. I hope you've found some useful insight into some of these strategies we are applying in the market to help our customers along this path. I'll hand back now to Megan, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Catherine. All right, let's take the next few minutes to answer some audience questions. So as a reminder, please use the Ask a Question feature to submit them. All right, let's start with the first few questions. All right, who or what role should I make responsible for this data transformation?
That's a great question. I actually had exactly that question in China 2 days ago. And it's one that we get a lot in the marketplace. People are saying, who's responsible for doing this? I would actually say it's a new role that we're seeing bubbling up in the market, and organisations may have to look within their own capabilities for the sort of person who is ideal for taking this role. The kind of person who will be able to facilitate this kind of capability will be a senior role who has good facilitation skills, has spent a reasonable amount of time working within the data within the organisation. So they may be coming out of, say, the analytics piece of your organisation, but they need an appreciation for both BI, technology, and also all of the communications processes that your business might be using, so marketing, services, etc. So as I say, it's more of a bubble up role than something that you can go out and actually put a title to. I hope that helps with the kind of person that you're looking for.
Great, thank you. All right, next question. How is a data layer created?
A data layer is created as an object within the data source. So it's the centralization, so it's created in the technology itself, but the idea behind it is that I want to put the data that's important to me in my business language, in one central location within the data source that I have. That has some technological advantages in terms of centralization, performance, consistency. The other piece of it is, though, that data layer then needs to be centralized somewhere else where we can bring together the data layers from all the other data sources so that we can actually start to build out this profile of this individual across the many sources. So technically it exists within the data source, but it also can exist, say, within a server where you can do the centralization and unification piece.
Thank you, Catherine. All right, next question. Are there certain solutions or technologies that help with identity resolution? Does Telium help with this?
Yes, Telium certainly does help with the identity resolution piece. I think the key piece to getting good identity resolution is first the strategy piece, and then identifying technologies in the marketplace that can actually facilitate the deterministic real-time unification of your data. And that is one thing that Telium was purpose-built to achieve. So we have a capability that enables us to use as many keys as you may have, so as many identifiers as you may have, not only now, but in the future, to bring together the data sources, to bring together the streams from any of your data sources, stitch them together, which simply is the recalculation of everything we know about an individual, using those identifiers, and then we have the capability to distribute that out into any of your technology sets. So we're a neutral capability, and I think that is the other piece for identity resolution that is key. If you want to truly understand an individual across any source, then the best way to actually achieve that is to have something that will work with all of your technologies. It simply can't be